Welcome to Ideas of India, a podcast where we examine academic ideas that can propel India forward. My name is Dallas Floor, and I'm one of the producers of Ideas of India, and we're kicking off the 2025 Job Market Series, where Shruti speaks with young scholars entering the academic job market about their latest research on India. Our second scholar in the series is Sunny Ray, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Computer and Information Science at the University of Pennsylvania. She received her PhD in computer engineering from the University of Delhi. Her research focuses on misinformation, mental health, and cross-cultural variations in human language. They spoke about her co-authored job market paper titled Social Norms in Cinema, a cross-cultural analysis of shame, pride, and prejudice. They talked about depictions of shame and pride and heroism in Indian versus American films, the challenges with textual analysis of a visual medium, and much more. For a full transcript of this conversation, including helpful links of all the references mentioned, click the link in the show notes or visit mercatus.org/podcasts.
Hi, Sunny. Welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super glad to be on this podcast.
And you might be our first computer scientist, I think. You know, we normally, we've had all sorts of people. We've had historians, economists, geographers, political scientists, every kind. But I think you might be our first computer scientist. So it's very, very exciting. I feel like we have expanded.
I feel honored to be part of this group. Of course, my research basically focuses on spending these computational methods for social science.
No, the reason I really enjoyed reading your paper and we invited you here is you're looking at social norms in cinema. The listeners of this podcast know that I'm a little obsessed with film. So, that's kind of an obvious fit. But you're more broadly looking at how can we use, these large language models and other tools to look at sort of cross-cultural behavior or cross-cultural norms. You and your co-authors in this particular paper, you mine subtitles of more than 5,000 Bollywood and Hollywood movies. And what you're studying is how these movies portray social emotions of shame and pride. And in particular, you try to triangulate who's feeling these emotions, who's targeted, and sort of what kinds of actions are triggered and so on. And by combining behavioral science and psychology and looking at language as one part of your toolkit, and also with the help of large language models, which can now, look at a lot of material very quickly, you quantify these cross-cultural differences. So this was like an absolutely fascinating thing to look into. I was terrified when we saw PhD in computer science. I was like, oh my God, is this going to be like something I don't understand at all? But it was super fun to read the paper. And what you find, let me give away the headline findings before you get into it. What you find is, as one would expect, the Bollywood dialogues talk about shame far more than you see in films in the United States. And shame in Hollywood, when you do perceive it, it's very self-focused. Whereas in Bollywood movies, it's very specific. It's very tied or gendered, right? The way women and men are shamed is quite different. And the sources are also different, whether it comes from family or society and so on and so forth. And this is like just absolutely fascinating. These are things I would have expected, but it's still very cool to see it in this particular format. So thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Rudy, for that wonderful summary. You have covered almost everything. So let me start with what got me interested in social norms. I have a super curious 5-year-old nephew. And one day I was watching him scrolling cartoons on YouTube. It was all nice. He was having fun. But very quickly, I saw that some of the characters and stories, they were filled with harmful stereotypes, things we wouldn't definitely want our kids to pick up. And that's when I thought, what if we build a system to detect social norms depicted in these videos? That way, it would be easier for parents to, identify videos or books or content that they want their kids to watch. And it will solve so many problems for us. But soon I realized that it's not that simple. Characters don't really come out and, say the norms they are teaching. Instead, these norms are hidden in the way they talk, act, and interact. So that got me thinking, how do we teach a machine to pick up on these unspoken social knowledge?
Yeah.
And like you rightly said, latest language models like ChatGPT, they are incredibly good at understanding human language. Most of us have already used them and are in awe with these technology. So Why not we just ask ChatGPT to, give us the norms depicted in the videos? Well, in some cases, yes, you can definitely do that if you are interested in norms of Western society. But these models do not do so well when it comes to underrepresented cultures in their training data. So that's where problem, arises. So the real research question became then, how can we teach machines to identify social norms across different cultures?
Yeah.
That's a very interesting question, right? And that made me wonder, like, how do we ourselves learn social norms? What kind of, teaches us that this behavior is acceptable and this behavior is not acceptable? So we figure out norms by observing how people react to our behaviors. If we get praised for a behavior, we are more likely to do it again. And if we are punished, we learn that we should not repeat this if we do not want to bear the same consequences again. In our research, we focused especially on these sanctions to uncover social norms, and it worked. We tested our approach on two very different cultures, Hollywood in America and Bollywood in India. These cultures are very different, and the norms that we uncovered align with known cultural tendency. Hollywood norms were more about self accountability, competence, whereas Bollywood norms were more about family honor and gender roles for women.
Yeah.
So that was something which was very interesting. And you know what? Like I said in the beginning, that it was my nephew who motivated me to study social norms. And you would be surprised to learn that World Bank team is actually deploying this approach to detect harmful gender stereotypes in short videos and movies. And they're trying to implement this approach for developing nations to understand what kind of content is shown to growing women and girls in those countries.
Before we get into how this is deployed, can you give us maybe an example? Like, what would be, all of us consume a lot of, I mean, at least I consume a lot of movies. What would be like a stereotypical Hollywood film and an example of how they depict shame? And Bollywood, I'm guessing there are a whole range of examples of how
Yes.
we shame women.
Yes, yes, of course. So take the example of movie Kabir Singh, which was
Yeah.
popular for all wrong reasons. And in this movie, there is a scene where Preeti, the actress played by Kiara Advani, she introduces her boyfriend to her family. And her boyfriend is Shahid Kapoor, Kabir Singh.
Yeah.
And her father called her shameless basically for bringing dishonor to the family. And he even makes himself clear that he will decide whom she marries. That's something very commonly depicted in Bollywood movies. It's not really only about the gender norms. We found that, for example, in movie Dear Zindagi,
Yeah.
it's again a very nice movie, and lead actress is Alia Bhatt. And in one of the scenes, she is talking about challenges of mental illness and how even her immediate family feels shame about feel shame or avoids discussing mental disorders
Yeah.
and like providing the option for going to therapy. This is how like very subtle cues, and this is how things are come up in these movies. And I think I would also like to take the name of Pushpa 2, which is
Oh,
something which
I haven't
which
watched that yet, or and
yeah.
probably will not.
And it made so much money, like it was one of the very big blockbuster. And you would see that movie when I was watching that movie. By then I had done this paper, and I was like this movie is such a huge mine of social norms. Like the lead character is constantly being sanctioned and shamed for lacking father's name. There were women characters in the movie who were like maybe abused by other characters, and they are constantly shamed for for that happening, and their family members were being shamed. So I felt that this is something which is still happening, and you would assume that we have moved on, right? We are in like right now in 2025, we might have stopped shaming women for like getting raped, but that's not the case even in
Or
today's
at the
world.
very least, start shaming the rapists, which also
Yeah,
you
yeah,
don't see
exactly.
all the time.
Yeah, but even today it's the same thing that's happening, and that's kind of very sad.
And what are some examples of maybe like movies in the West? Like, how do they depict shame? Like, what would be like a classic example?
Yeah, so in Hollywood movies, shame happens when you have failed to do a certain duty. For example, you were not honest, and people discovered you were not honest, and therefore you will be shamed. You would be shamed if you are incompetent. You are not able to make a good living, honest living. So that will bring you shame. For women, it's about again social appearance. if you have a certain type of appearance, certain social etiquettes, certain way about yourself, then you would be like praised. Like in every society, there is this thing, right? That if women behaves more openly, then something that troubles people around them. So again, like you do not want women to have very open opinions. I guess they are just different reasons. So it's mostly because of promiscuity. Women are more shamed in Hollywood movies.
So they're like slut shamed.
Slut shaming, yeah, yeah, slut shame.
But what would be an example of like men being shamed for not doing their duty or something like that?
For example, if you went on a date night, but you didn't call back after the date. So, like, you are trying to avoid confrontation. So that's considered like shameful. You should be honest in your interaction. So that's like it's not a very strong shame marker, but at least there will be subtle shame. Selling poor quality goods, that's again something that will show up in the movie and say people will shame you for that kind of behavior. So it's again about like ethics and honesty and competency. These are the very central themes when it comes to what is considered socially appropriate behavior in Hollywood movies.
And I guess the other differences in the movies, in Hollywood movies, it's a lot about the individual and what they do and don't do. Whereas, in Bollywood movies, it's a lot to do with your relationship with someone else. Like even the most famous example I can think of shaming men is like Diwar, right? Like you write "Mera baap chor hai" on you tattoo that on the hand. Like the kid has done nothing wrong, but that's what you do.
Yeah.
So it's usually in relation to you bring shame upon the family for something that you may have not even done, but just simply because you're in a particular like social structure or a milieu or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's completely true. And that's what we also discovered, that these two societies differ so much in the way they are like shaming people, as well as for the reason they are shaming people. And again, like you pointed out, India is again very interdependent culture. What children are doing, that will influence parents honor, and what parents are doing, it will in turn influence children honor and their status in the society. Whereas in case of Hollywood, it's not the case. What parents have done, it's completely different. Maybe you will get benefit from it, but you will have to again choose your own goals and pick your own achievements to be respected by the society. So honor is not so interconnected in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Whereas in case of Bollywood, yes, it's very interconnected.
And this, of course, as you point out, is a reflection of the two cultures. Now, the setup is very interesting. It's very intuitive. All the examples you give make a lot of sense. So I guess now my question is, how do you go about testing something like this?
I'm glad you asked this. So we actually designed a study with two different approaches because they give us two very different kind of insights. And these large language models, normally we definitely want something more explainable, to validate the findings that we are obtaining through these black boxes. So our first approach is basically the explainable component of our approach, and it actually tells you the kind of words people are using around shame and pride expression. So for example, this dictionary which we used for vocabulary method is called Luke, Linguistic Inquiry, and Wordka, and it basically categorizes words into broader cognitive categories. For example, happiness will be called positive emotion, and there would be so many words which are depicting happiness. They will all be grouped under positive emotion. And likewise, there is category like first person pronoun and second person pronoun. So when we are analyzing shame related expression, we can actually count the number of times these first person pronoun have occurred in their vicinity, and this can tell us whether shame is self oriented. Likewise, if there are more second person pronoun, then we can say that shame is outward oriented. Like you are shaming someone else, you are regulating someone else's behavior, but in the former case, you are regulating your behavior. So this helps us map the style and patterns of how sanction is expressed across culture. The second is the prompting method. And here we take advantage of powerful language models like GPT-4 to understand why shame and pride is expressed. So the first approach is about how. Second is approach is about why. And so if someone says, I feel proud or I feel ashamed, we basically give the surrounding dialogues to the model and ask, could you tell the reason based on the given dialogues, why is this person feeling pride or shame? So together these two approaches give us both surface view of the language, that is what words people use, and the deeper story revealing what motivates those feelings.
What do you find in the difference between these two approaches?
Yeah.
Like, did both of them confirm each other, or What did you find when you tested for this?
Yeah, both of them confirm each other actually. So you will see that in Bollywood we saw increased use of social references. For example, family. We There is collective sense when there is conversation about the social emotion. Whereas in case of Hollywood, you would have noticed that there is very high correlation with first person pronouns. There is very high correlation with anxiety and guilt. So people actually feel bad when they do something wrong, and it's mostly about like something that is not ethically correct. Whereas in case of Bollywood, there is anger, there is a female association. So the thing is that in case of Bollywood, shame is more like a regulatory component. So it is used to control others' behavior. Whereas in case of Hollywood, it's more about you feel bad, and therefore like it was not the morally right thing to do, and therefore you are feeling bad and you are feeling guilty and anxiety about it. Whereas in case of Bollywood, you people are expressing anger, and people are calling you out because you have done something, and the idea is to make them aware of the consequences so that same thing doesn't happen again. And when we did the prompting approach, we found these reasons, and we when we clustered them together, we found similar pattern. Like in case of Hollywood, it was more about accountability, incompetence, social etiquettes, whereas in case of Bollywood, it was more about respecting elders, gender roles, son's duty towards parents, and things like that. So we did found that the results we found were aligning with each other.
Except slut shaming, which is just universally an
It's just
external
universal,
sanker,
yeah.
and that's just bad for women
Yeah.
all over the world.
Yeah.
So, one question I had is what you've done is, I mean, it's super impressive. You've actually managed to find subtitles of more than 5,000 films and run them through your model. But, films are fundamentally a visual medium. And now it seems to me like there's an automatic bias when you rely exclusively on dialogue, right? Because there are going to be some films which are very verbose. Like, if something's written by Aaron Sorkin or Salim Javed, it's going to have lots and lots of dialogue, just nonstop dialogue. Whereas there might be other kinds of film which are just much more screenplay driven, background music driven. They're not as verbose, or at least all the members are not that verbose. So what is a good way of thinking about that, and how do you control for that?
That's a very good question. And I completely agree with you that our approach can capture violation only if they are verbally expressed. So if someone is communicating sanction through their glance or body language, it will be completely missed by our model. To overcome this, we did think about using movie scripts because they come with stage direction. So it basically tells how this character is feeling, what does the surrounding look like for this character, what does other character think about this character. So things that we infer from the scene, they are all written in the script. But the only challenge is that not many movie scripts are available online.
And most of the Indian films don't even have a movie script sometimes, let alone make them available later.
So ideally we would have loved to use movie scripts, but those were not available. But in future work, we would definitely love to integrate visual cues. Now we have models, we have multimodal language models that can work with image as well as dialogues. So that's something we are looking forward to.
No, that would be great. What about songs? Because songs do get picked up in subtitles, and Bollywood is just full of songs, and there's a lot expressed through songs, like, and there's also shame and things like that. So, like famously you have Laga Chunri Mein Daag or something like that, right? So so do you also include songs as part of dialogues in the subtitles?
No, we do not. I agree that so
you got to do a separate one just on songs. I think that should be the next paper.
I'll tell you why. Because like you said, that songs are very metaphorical in nature. It's not really like your literal conversation that's happening between character, right? So if you want to understand songs, you need to have additional component in your method to work with creative text. And in fact, I did my PhD on metaphors. I love metaphors.
Oh, wow.
So yes, I mean, I definitely appreciate this component. Like songs do have very deep meanings, and they do have very deep messages. In fact, songs all around us, whether they are in movies or not, they do carry a deep social meaning. Like what are the behaviors that you should do? For example, if you think of wedding songs, they also have like so many customs and to-dos for women.
Yeah.
This is how you should be behaving once you get married. So yeah, that's a very interesting avenue. But in this paper, we only focused on spoken dialogues.
Yeah, and I wonder if, the songs, because they're metaphorical, can actually compensate for the lack of visual component or the lack of screenplay that you have. Because there is some broader metaphor that's at least captured through the song, though it's not
Yeah.
captured through the screenplay. So it would be super interesting to see that in future work.
Yeah.
Now, the next part is like you use subtitles, right? So basically, even though this is a cross-cultural sort of analysis, the cross-culture is boiled down to subtitles which are in English. If I understand this correctly. The trouble is, and I've spent the last 18 years in the United States watching Hindi films, and so they're usually subtitled. The subtitles are horrible until very recently. So I think, I think last year or maybe a little bit before that, Nasreen Munni Kabir came on the podcast, and she's recently started subtitling and she does it amazingly well. And we were just talking about how bad movie subtitles were. And my favorite bad subtitle of all time is from this movie called Mangal Pandey The Rising, where Kailash Kher is singing this rousing title song and he says Mangal 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 Mangal, and the subtitle is Tuesday 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 Tuesday. And I just laughed out loud when I saw that. And I was just, I was telling Nasreen Munni Kabir, I was just grateful it didn't say Mars, 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 Mars. Instead of Tuesday. Like, it can only get worse as the subtitling is done by machines. So how do you solve for like just automatic biases here, right? And a lot of subtitling, especially post Google and YouTube, is just done by their model, which was also terrible. It wasn't done by humans. So what is a good way to think about this or solve for this?
Yeah, what you are referring to is ambiguity. Like this Mangal
Or just plain incorrect.
Yeah, so I mean, data quality is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to training models. And like you might have already heard, garbage in, garbage out. So if you're
Yeah.
teaching model to Tuesday, it will also, output Tuesday only. So
Yeah.
it will not by default learn that it's a name of our person, the character. So in theory, cleanest solution would be to buy the movies and hire people to carefully transcribe all the dialogues. Basically, you do your own subtitling or like,
Yeah.
right? But that just does not scale. Human
Yeah.
transcription is expensive and slow. In fact,
Yeah.
it could take 2 to 4 hours to label these
Yeah.
situations.
Per movie, and you have 5,000 movies,
You
of
have
which like
5,000 movies,
half
yeah.
of them are Bollywood movies. So yeah, that's a big data set.
Yeah, and you would wonder what about automatic transcription? But like you said, that these subtitles are probably auto-generated, and that's why they are bad. And with movies, because there are multiple characters speaking sometime at once, so there is a lot of errors because of that as well. The model is not able to clearly segment dialogue which was delivered in parts by one character, so it just jumbled up everything. So, I mean, ideally, we would have loved to have the actual transcription
Yeah.
in the original native language so that we are not relying on these machine translation. But subtitles are the only things that are widely available, and they are mostly available in English because a person who knows Hindi or wants to watch Hindi movie is
Yeah.
probably aware of Hindi language and doesn't need Hindi subtitles. So
Yeah.
it's mostly the language which is more commonly spoken in the world. While subtitles are not perfect, we put in safeguards to overcome the challenges and these kind of errors. Like we always manually review a random set of samples to check quality. And in this particular case, since we were only interested in dialogues around shame and pride, the data set was not that big and we were able to
Yeah.
manually review everything ourselves. So that
Yeah.
is how we made sure that we are not capturing any
Yeah, it's not like
Tuesday.
Mangal Mangal Tuesday. No,
Yes.
I think you're absolutely right. You're looking for something so specific, and it's a very clear, precise emotion, right? With very specific words associated with it. If something goes wrong in translation, you can always correct.
Yeah.
But I'm also like just more broadly curious. You have this conundrum. So if you rely too much on dialogue and too much on subtitling, there's one kind of bias, right? Now, how do you sort of correct for underrepresentation of certain kinds of shame. So, like this year was recently it was 50th year of Sholay, for instance, right? Sholay has two leading women. One of them is like, Hema Malini, who's Basanti, who is a working woman and like just always colorful and chatty and so on. And the other one is Jaya Bachchan, and Radha, she's a widow. And so she has maybe like 6 lines in the entire film. And it's also very clearly shown how colorful and happy and sort of chirpy she was before she became a widow. And then she's just in all white, right? So now there is this social shame associated with being a widow. You can't be flamboyant. You can't sing. You can't have color on you. There's a whole bunch of things going on, but it never gets captured in dialogue. Right? Except maybe like when they're telling the story of Radha before she became a widow. There's like, 4 sentences or 5 sentences there, and that's it. So what is a way to think about these sorts of things more broadly? I guess I'm not trying to say that your one paper has to solve for everything. But when you look at something which is so specific like shame more broadly, how does one think about capturing all of this? Like, are there things you look for in dialogue, like looking for treatment of widows or treatment of older women or treatment of children born out of wedlock or something very specific?
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And in fact, we are completely aware that explicit matching, keyword matching of shame and pride only only covers a very small set of norm violation. And there are so many situations where norm violation might be expressed through other emotions or might be expressed without saying any emotion. Maybe you are just slapping someone and that's the sanction. That's where you violated the norm. In fact, domestic abuse is a form of sanction also. There is definitely a very strong limitation when you are looking with explicit when you are looking for explicit words like shame and pride, and we are trying to overcome this by trying to infer implicit sanctions. So, and for this purpose, again, we are relying on this large language models, and we are basically trying to teach them how does a shame look like, or how does embarrassment look like. So we have like this list of big list of emotions that might cause sanction, and we are explaining the definition. We are giving some example that this would be considered a case of shame, or this would be considered a case of like guilt, to basically make it understand what is something that is caused by external evaluation and what is something that is caused by internal evaluation. So that is something ongoing, and in future I hope that we will be able to figure this out, and we will be able to also quantify how many norm violation can be captured by explicit keyword matching versus how many are missed out. Right now we don't know what is the coverage of the approach. That's also another challenge.
The reason I asked the question is not to say that the paper has to have all of this completely covered and comprehensive, but more about what you're talking about is so contextual and so socially contextual that at some point when you're extrapolating, right, if we manage to remove that context completely, you're going to get biased one way or another way, right? It's going to be over or underrepresented. I guess it's like any other complicated problem. You need to write multiple papers and kind of look at it in multiple different ways. What was something that surprised you when you were looking at it, right? So, I mean, the gender thing doesn't surprise either of us, right? The fact that young people are shamed more than older people doesn't surprise us. Something simple like, policemen always show up 5 minutes late, right? So that kind of, that was pretty famous in the 70s and 80s movies. That doesn't surprise us. But was there something that did surprise you when you were looking into this?
I think the one thing that surprised me was this self-shaming versus other shaming. When you see the result, I think it becomes intuitive, and you think like, yes, of course, that is how it would be. But before we did this paper, I wasn't even aware that there could be like these two versions of shaming or self-regulation. Like there is one version where basically you try to self-regulate rather than depending on society to tell you what is good or bad. And then there is the other version where society is actually regulated so much by other regulation, other people telling you what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, and that is what kind of determines what we will do in life or how we will behave with others, right? So that was something very surprising to me, and in fact that kind of led me to discover this further. And as of now I'm also working on another paper where where we are trying to look how does LLM behave when it comes to these kind of situations. There are multiple objectives. There is self objective and then there is other objective. Now, who does it prioritize? Does it prioritize family over you, or does it prioritize you over work? So that's something, because these language models are mostly trained on Western data, right? So they are being told to put yourself first and be moral and ethical. But what about these cultural nuances where you are expected to sacrifice yourself for your family? You are expected to, let go of your wellness because you want to provide for your children.
Yeah.
So,
Or
so
give up your lover because your best friend is in love with her. That's another classic love
yeah,
triangle trope, right? Which is so annoying.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is something we are actively analyzing, and very soon maybe there will be another paper. I expect to release this work by the end of December.
No, I really look forward to reading that. I mean, I've been asking you all these questions about film, which is obviously what you're looking at. That's also not what you primarily do. You could do this in any context. You could do this through newspapers. You could do this through surveys. You could do this
Yeah.
through song. But now, if I ask you to put on your computer scientist hat, like if you were advising people who were building some of these large language models, right? What would you advise them to do or not do? Because AI safety is now a really big part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Localization and making things contextual to local culture is again a very big part of the conversation.
Yeah.
So how can your research inform some of what's happening there? Because that stuff is literally being built as we speak.
Exactly. This whole domain is called norm discovery, and using these norms to align language model is also known as like value alignment or LLM alignment, and that is something that is actively pursued right now in the domain. I started with the motivation that I will extract these norms and I will also align language model. I will also, fine tune them to make them more culturally aware and more engaging for the target users. But at the end of the paper, I realized that more important thing is to characterize what you are teaching to large language models. Because when we looked at this data set, we found that first of all, the sanctioning is something very biased for weaker sections of the society. So, for example, women will be more shamed. Likewise, someone with lower income will be more shamed for the similar behavior, or will be more sanctioned for the similar behavior. So, if you are teaching if you are teaching LLM whether something is appropriate or not, it is also need to be considered. Is it for women? Is it for a peon? Is it for a CEO? Like,
Yeah.
does it matter? Like,
Yeah.
who do people care if a politician is doing something inappropriate?
Yeah.
So I think now with for alignment, we need to take a step back and carefully look at the data which we are feeding to this model. Are we teaching it to express social bias? Like, if a woman is asking if she can go out and attend a concert, is it going to tell you that probably you should be back to home by 8 p.m.? Does it say similar thing to men? So that's something we need to be very cognizant of.
Yeah. No, and even between two women, right? Like so many Hindi films where the stepdaughter or the Cinderella factor, as we call it, like, the niece who is, or the orphan is treated so much worse than the other girls at home and things like that, right? So
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
the Sita or Gita sort of phenomenon, as one would
Yeah.
say. Yeah, no, this stuff is really fascinating. And I really look forward to reading your other work. This was a lot of fun for me to read. And actually, I was like actively trying to think of examples. And if you ever want to do something on Bollywood songs, like, please come back and chat with us, because the only thing I like more than Bollywood movies is probably Bollywood songs. So,
Yes, of course.
so it'll be an enormous amount of fun.
Yeah. It was super fun for me also, and I love the way you helped me understand some of the aspects, like the song thing, which I was not really focusing on, but maybe I will start looking at it again. Thank you so much.
It's funny, the song thing, it's really funny. Like, I was literally thinking of Laga Chunri Mein Daag. It is such a phenomenal song, right? I mean, it's like Bhairavi and Sahir Ludhianvi has written the songs, Manna Dey has sung. We forget the kind of shame they are talking about, because the song is so fantastic, right?
Yeah.
We sing this at competitions. We sing this, on Indian Idol. If someone sings it, they get lots of claps or applause because it's such a tough song to sing. But actually, the content of the song is not the best signal we're sending out there. So it's kind of amazing how one can think about some of these things. The songs are particularly interesting, but again, I mean, lyrics are such a tiny part of the song. I imagine you're going to run into a lot of trouble even when you do that project. But it would be fun for me to see what you find.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's what I also notice in children videos. Like, it would appear so harmless. Everybody is thinking like, what's wrong with this depiction? But you will see that there is a group of boys and, they're bullying girls and not letting her play with them. Or maybe there is always this woman who is depicted in the role of like stereotypical mother preparing food, packing lunches, and father is like nowhere, nowhere to be seen. So I really felt that, is this what we are like teaching to our kids, that this is how you will be behaving to people around you?
Sunny, you're a lot younger than me, I believe, but I thought when we were growing up, every Hindi movie song had what I called the playful stalker.
Yes.
In the song, it's like the men are harassing women. They're pinching their cheeks, they're pulling their dupatta, they're pulling their hair. And by the end of the song, the girl magically falls in love with them. And all of us were raised to believe that this is how people fall in love with the movies. If someone had done that in real life, you would have smacked them. So it's you're so right. It's so bizarre, the content that some of us have grown up on, and maybe some of us have even internalized without realizing what it is we are consuming. And now you have a second responsibility. You have to do this for kids, and you have to figure out how we do this in developing countries for young girls. But you're also simultaneously training neural networks and the large language models, which is like training a 5-year-old in some sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that now we are getting exposed to these technologies more and more. And it is very important that we understand what these models will be, expressing and how they will be expressing, because end users and end user are so much in awe with these technologies. Some people actually think that whatever they are saying is right, and that's how things should be. So so it's very important that we know what we are teaching to these models, we evaluate what they are learning, and eventually there should be some form of regulation on like how what kind of things that these technologies should express and should not express.
Yeah, no, that's why I'm looking forward to this research. I think you have your work cut out for you. You must have this long list of research projects. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Sunny, and talking to us about this research. This was a lot of fun for me to read.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Ideas of India is produced by the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Help us grow by giving us a rating and leaving a review. Follow us on Twitter at @SRajagopalan and at Ideas of India. Also check out our initiative commemorating 30 years of India's market reforms at the 1991project.com.